Let me start this review by making one thing clear. The MacBook Air is an incredible laptop. Its processing power and its battery life are way better than any of its predecessors. And that's to do with one thing, the new M1 chip inside this laptop. But before we go any further, it's important to add a bit of context as to why the MacBook Air is so impressive. Technology brands usually operate in a 12 or 24-month update cycle. Every year or two, products are updated with incremental improvements. This usually means a slightly more powerful processor or a marginally better battery life or display or keyboard or whatever. The upgrades are usually welcome, but a bit meh. What Apple has done with its new M1 chips in the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Mini is something that only comes along every 10, 15 or maybe 20 years, which is a long way of saying you should believe the hype about the new M1 chip. M1 is what Apple is calling its new ARM-based chip, which confusingly, Apple also calls silicon. It's significant because it's the first time Apple has released Macs without an Intel chip inside. The move brought two major challenges. The obvious challenge was, can Apple outperform Intel's chips? And the answer to that question is an emphatic yes. Another challenge Apple faced was how it was going to make its M1 chip backwards compatible with Mac apps and other software that has been designed to work with Intel chips. Apple's answer to this is an extra layer of translation software called Rosetta II. When you first try and run an Intel-designed Mac app, your new MacBook Air, MacBook Pro or Mac Mini will display a pop-up window prompting you to install Rosetta II in order to run the Intel app. 5 seconds later, Rosetta II is installed, and those 5 seconds are the only difference you'll notice. It really is that slick. And there are no noticeable performance issues running old Intel apps on the new M1 Macs. It's a huge win for Apple. We need to talk about the similarities the Air and the Pro share, because these two laptops are closer than ever. Both devices share the same M1 chip. The only difference is the entry-level 256GB MacBook Air comes with a 7-core GPU, whereas the 256GB 13-inch MacBook Pro has an 8-core GPU. The other major difference is the MacBook Air doesn't have a fan. Usually this would be a big deal. However, the M1 chip is so efficient that most users won't need a fan most of the time. Early tests and reports from trusted sources suggest you have to put the MacBook Air under serious stress for 10 to 30 minutes before performance starts to dip. And the reality is there are a few pros who will be doing this on a regular basis. Other than the lack of fan, the Pro differs from the Air with a slightly better and brighter screen, a larger battery, and noticeably higher quality mics and speakers. The only other feature that the Pro has, and the Air doesn't, is its touch bar. I know a lot of people don't like the touch bar, but I love it, and I'd love to see it in the Air one day too. Apple's other operating systems, iOS and iPadOS, already run on ARM-based chips. What that means now is the Mac can now run apps from iOS and iPadOS on macOS. It sounds a lot more exciting than it actually is. App developers have to make their iOS and iPadOS apps available for the new M1 apps. Facebook for iPad is probably the most well-known I've discovered here in New Zealand, which is a bit pointless because Facebook is already optimized for web browsers. I was able to access the UK's My5 and the US's HBO Max video streaming apps by switching my app store and turning on a VPN. This is where I discovered you cannot make iPadOS and iOS apps full screen on the Mac, and that sucks. The one area where Apple has missed its mark with the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro is a 720p web camera. I've been trying to think of reasons why Apple has equipped the MacBook Air with such a mid-range webcam, and the best I can come up with is this. A 1080p or greater camera would be a bigger drain on the battery life. And during this period where people are using Zoom more than ever, Apple felt a 720p camera with its latest image signal processing is a more than pragmatic solution. Given the advancements Apple has made regarding machine learning and its neural engine, the results it can produce from a 720p camera might be good enough. I don't really buy this though. The cold truth of it is a 720p camera on a MacBook Air in 2020 is a flaw. The benchmark scores of the MacBook Air are amazing. Its single-core Geekbench 5 score is 10% higher than any other Mac, and that's been running the benchmark through its translation software Rosetta II. The native M1 single-core Geekbench 5 score is over 50% higher than other Macs. The multi-core scores are equally impressive, with only the Mac Pro, the huge tower Mac, beating its scores. The battery performance of previous generation Intel Macs have been going nowhere for years, while the battery performance of iPads and iPhones has been steadily improving. Clearly, battery performance was an area Apple was looking to nail with the M1, and it really has. You'll get at least 50% better battery performance with the Air, which in real-world terms means you can expect to use the M1 13-inch MacBook Air for about 16 hours on a single charge. The last thing I want to say about battery performance is this. Apple can now engineer more performance per watt than Intel. The game has changed. Okay, here's my verdict. I love this laptop. I love the previous MacBook Airs and I love the MacBook Pros too. But now it's got the M1 chip, and the M1 chip brings some pretty good advantages. Faster processing and better battery life is huge, especially in laptops. And the fact that the MacBook Air now has that and a 16-hour battery life, it's just going to mean people are going to love this more than they loved the previous laptops. The previous MacBook Airs, I should say. The price point is excellent. The Magic Keyboard is excellent. The big trackpad is excellent. I'm not mad about the gold colour of this laptop, but the silver laptop's great. The only problem with this laptop is the 720p camera, and you can overlook that really. Let me end by saying this. If you're thinking about buying the new MacBook Air or thinking about switching to Apple, do it. You're really going to love this new laptop.